Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome back into another edition of PTN Extra. I'm Evan Kamiko. We're going to talk about the Mississippi State game in just a little bit. Mike Irwin will join me to talk about that. But first, really excited to welcome a special guest, friend of PTN, Ethan Westerman from Whole Hog Sports. Ethan, first of all, thanks for coming in and talking some women's basketball as season's starting in a little over 2 weeks.
Yeah, happy to do it, and I didn't know where the studio was. It was cool to come up here and see what all y'all got going on up here.
So, it's funny whenever we're sitting in the press boxes and stuff, it's fun to kind of see you in your element when you're writing. So now that we're in kind of our element on set and with all the lights and all the cameras, but I will say, you were pretty quick once I sent you the right directions.
Oh yeah, I knew the general vicinity. I just didn't know how to. I couldn't do I couldn't close in the fourth quarter. That's what happened to me right there.
That's tough. Kind of like Mississippi State in the second half of most of the games so far that they've played, at least in the second half.
Yeah, pretty much. Just call me the Bulldogs.
Okay, well maybe not. People might not like that. But let's jump into some women's basketball talk right now. We've been texting back and forth over the last couple of weeks about it, talking at all the other football games. And when you were at SEC Media Days in Birmingham for that. First of all, what was your takeaway just from the vibe of Mike Neighbors, Izzy Higginbottom, and Christina Sanchez?
Yeah, well, I mean, right off the bat, the day before Media Day begins, they get picked last in the SEC preseason poll. So, that's kind of the elephant in the room whenever they show up, whenever, you were picked last place. So I guess I kind of ripped that one off, ripped the Band-Aid off quick because it was the first question I asked about in Neighbors' podium address. And, the vibe I got was, they've talked about it. They understand that nobody has really any expectations for them this year, and they're fine with it. They seem like a group that they really like each other this year as far as like on the court, in the locker room. They all get along great. It's just a matter of, what can it materialize into whenever they do lace them up and play a game.
And that's something that we saw kind of last year of the vibe of this team was off. You could kind of sense something. That there was a lot going on social media between whether that was Talia Scott or Samara Spencer, Michaela Daniels chiming in. And you had just a lot of, I think, big personalities budding. And that's something that when Christina Sanchez is on SEC Network and she's talking about green energy and this like kind of renewed, restored energy in a sense to this program. But it's a different kind of team this year, right? It's not what we've seen in the past from Arkansas women's basketball, where they're bringing in some of these top freshmen and some of these top players. Instead, Coach Neighbors went kind of a different direction. He went the international direction. There's 5 right now on this roster. What impresses you most about the way that he's made up this roster? Because it is different than probably your typical roster construction that we've seen.
Yeah, well, he made an emphasis to make it clear that he's not wanting to. There's some programs, like if you look at Washington State's roster, I think they have 2 American-born players on their team. Like they've gone pretty much completely international. And he made it clear like he wants to have a good balance moving forward. This is something he wants to continue doing. This international thing isn't just like a one-off, let's experiment and see. I think that's a direction they're wanting to go. He pointed to the Olympics and how competitive it was this year. I mean, the championship game was 67-66 USA beating France. We've seen it may be a cakewalk for the U.S. most years. So they're kind of picking up on that global trend. Usually men's basketball, we see all the international superstars in the NBA, Luka Doncic, the Joker. You see all these guys, and it just takes a little bit to translate to the women's side. But I think that it's a path that they're wanting to continue to go. But they're not going to stray away from getting players from the U.S. on their team, too. He kind of wants that 50-50 is what he said. So that's kind of how they've put together the roster this year. I'm not sure. It's always hard the first year, especially that you're adjusting to like such a big, in general, philosophical change that you're doing that with your roster. So we'll see how they come together. There's a lot of communication barriers that don't even hardly think about. Whenever you generally just look at it and say, oh, they have a player from Finland, a player from Spain, cool. But no, that's a lot of communication that needs to, to materialize on the court. So.
And to your point there, Coach Neighbors is saying that every single time it feels like there is something where he's like, I have to explain this more in depth, but it makes them feel like they're being better teachers. It makes them feel like they are, communicating the game and really breaking it down. And one of the things I actually texted you about to ask was kind of this defensive first mentality, and you start the season with Fairfield coming in here, a team who has won 30 or so games a couple of the last years, and it's a really good Fairfield squad. What impressed you about when Neighbors was answering that question, that they are switching their mentality because of what they have to do to get ready for the regular season?
For sure. Well, first of all, I think that in just basketball in general, it's harder to, if you have the communication difference, because, they can all understand what he's teaching. It's just kind of different terminology, and he has an Arkansas dialect. He even mentioned it. He was like, I need subtitles for my American players. So there's already that little barrier, but it's harder, I think, on the offensive end to see it all come together, especially when you are having to deal with, he has even crazier terminology with his offense because there's rabbits and dragons. Like it's positionless basketball with terms. So anyway, there's a lot that goes into his offense, I think, trying to get them all on the same page. So I think that, he mentioned it, Fairfield is really good. I mean, they had votes to be ranked in the preseason. They were ranked part of last year, and they're going to start the season with them. And if their defense isn't, as he said, in midseason form, they're going to really struggle in non-conference play because the offense, it's going to take some time to come together. Izzy Higginbottom, she's a bucket. She's going to be able to score day one. The rest of it might take a little bit of time to come together. But the defense, if they can play some good defense, that'll keep you in games. And I think that's what he understands. It's what they understand, that they got to have the defensive intensity to start the year.
Let's talk about that roster. I love that you mentioned Izzy right there. She played Arkansas last year, came over from Arkansas State. Believe she dropped 22 points on the Razorbacks the last time they played. Quote me on that, don't quote me on that. Don't remember off the full top of my head. But what impresses you about kind of this roster and the way it's structured outside of Izzy? You have some returners, but again, Carly Keats, we saw her light it up from three, but kind of went cold as she got hurt. Jenna Lawrence, who knows what's going to be around her? Who on this roster are you looking to take that step and kind of be a complementary piece to Izzy?
Jenna Lawrence, for sure. I saw her. So they already played an exhibition game. They played Northeastern State D2 school in Oklahoma, and Jenna Lawrence shot the ball really well. And the connection that she has with Higginbottom, they're both from Northeast Arkansas. I know Jenna has Farmington attached to her because that's where she finished her high school career. She's actually up there in the northeast corner. Izzy's from Batesville too, so they already knew each other. And whenever Izzy passes her the ball, like Izzy had 3 assists just on threes to Jenna Lawrence. So I think Jenna's a player that I would look to kind of have a little bit of a breakout. They can shoot better than they did last year. Like this team, I know Mike Neighbors says it, it's true. They're less of just shot takers and they're shot makers this year. I see that if they had the athleticism maybe of last year, it's going to be hard for them to get open looks, in my opinion, because it's just not as athletic of a team as last year, in my opinion, but they can really shoot the ball. And I would look for, Jenna Lawrence is going to play a big role. Carly Keats, for sure. Kiki Smith, the JUCO Player of the Year that they got in, she can really shoot. I think it'll maybe take a little bit of development for her, too, but those are just some names I would keep an eye on.
And what about the front court? You have all of these guards come in. Phoenix Stojan from the Netherlands coming in. She could be somebody to make a really big impact. But what about that front court where you have to replace a Sailor Poffenbarger and you have to replace a Miriam Dowda?
Yeah, that's where I think that if you're looking at this team, that's where the biggest question marks come into play. Vera, and I'm going to try and pronounce her last name, Ojinua, I think that's how you spell it at least. It's going to take, with an international roster, it's going to take some time for me to get all these pronunciations right. Like, I think it's actually Phoenix Stohine.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, it's...
I mean, I'm not Dutch. That's a little tough to...
It's going to take some time, but I think it's Vera Ojinua. She's really just has a raw game about her. Like, you can tell how athletic she is. She's originally from Nigeria, played some community college before coming here. I think she, by the time she gets developed and is in the system with Nick Bradford coaching her a little bit, the new assistant coach, she's going to be really good. But it's going to, that's the thing about playing the SEC. To get that development, it usually takes going through the likes of playing South Carolina, LSU, now Texas, all these big name teams that just have such good front court play. And it's going to, you learn with the bumps and bruises in the SEC, but she's one to keep an eye on. Danica Galia, hopefully I did her name right. She's from Malta. She's going to add some depth there. But yeah, that's where the questions reside. I mean, Jenna Lawrence, she's a flexible piece where you can play her, put her on the floor a lot of times. It's going to take some time to materialize. That's the thing. I think that's why they're so big on the defense right now. It's just like with all these uncertainties, you just got to bring the defensive edge right now.
Yeah, and we'll talk in a second about kind of big picture, and we'll have to ask the tough question about Coach Neighbors. But when you look at the SEC as a whole, let's talk about the conference. What are the teams that are kind of on top that you think are going to finish up there? Obviously, South Carolina coming off a perfect season. And what are maybe a surprise team or two in the SEC that Arkansas kind of wants to be because they want to be that surprise team. They want to finish better than 16th. But what are those teams to you right now?
Yeah, well, I'll go off. I voted in the preseason poll for Media Day, and I did the top 5 as number 1 South Carolina. You can't really go against them. Like, it's just not smart. And then I had my number 2 team is Texas. They're loaded. They're going to be really good. LSU's a contender still. Oklahoma's good. That's the thing. The 2 members are both really good that they added. My sneaky pick, though, since you're asking, Alabama, they're going to be good. They're going to be really good, in my opinion, and it's kind of some familiarity there for Arkansas fans. Pauline Love, who's been an assistant at Arkansas, she's now an assistant there. They returned some of their biggest playmakers, and they got Zay Green, a transfer from Arkansas Pine Bluff, who she was liable for a double-double almost every single night. She was on the court last year, and she was a former 5-star recruit, had to go off the beaten path a little bit. They're going to be good. That's my sneaky team that Arkansas, would love to move into that category. Because that's the thing about the SEC and women's basketball. It's not an overnight jump into that elite tier. It's just not. It's a gradual, and Alabama's on that gradual climb, I think, right now. So is Ole Miss. They're a team that's been there recently. Another sneaky team, Auburn. I'm going to say, I've seen enough Talia Scott hoops to know that
I think some Hog fans at home are a little upset because I was going to go with Tennessee and Samara Spencer, Kim Caldwell, what she's building there, but I like your Auburn pick.
Auburn they play such tough defense. Like, that's the identity of their team, and then they just got an elite scorer on their team too. Auburn's sneaky in my book. Tennessee's a good point too. I don't know how that's going to go year one over there because they're running like a run and gun offense, get down the court quick. Samara Spencer should thrive in it.
I was going to say that fits her play style.
But it just seems like it's a lot. But that Kim Caldwell, she is a very tough coach. I could just tell from just how she talks to media. I've seen videos of her talking about what they did with their team. I talked to some of their players and the workouts they went through. I'm like, my goodness, y'all are really running a lot. So that's a good pick too. I think Mississippi State could slide up there as well.
Yeah, let's circle back. Let's talk about what we're here to talk about, and that's Arkansas. Look, it's a conversation that we hope does not happen. We do not want it to happen, but it's something I need to bring up here. Last season was rough for Arkansas, right? Like, you have all of these expectations. You're supposed to be a tournament team and this and that and make a deep run in the postseason. It all comes crashing, falling apart. You don't make the NCAA tournament. Then you go to the new postseason tournament, pretty much get crushed against Tulsa, and that's a good Tulsa team, by the way. And now you lose 5 starters, whether that's 4 to the transfer portal, Michaela Daniels, because she graduates. The question I have for you is, if this season goes bad, what happens with Coach Neighbors?
I wish Hunter Yurchek was here to talk with us because, you just don't know. I think that this year, they're not dumb. The coaches understand this is a big year for them. They need to have a better year than they did last year. And it's not necessarily like last year they had a bad year whenever you look at their record and stuff. It's just the potential that they did have, the talent that they did have on the team, the way that it did end with getting just, for lack of a better term, stomped in the WBIT over at Tulsa. It was just the way the season ended. It was all too familiar with just it kind of crashing down. So they understand it's a big year for them. There needs to be, maybe the win-loss won't be the same as it was last year, but there needs to be something, I think, at the end of the year that you say, look at that. That's something you can build off of next year. I think that the Nick Bradford hire was huge. He's really good, just connections, has a lot of them on the grassroots level. He's a good developer. So I think that was big for them to get him. I'd like to see what their recruiting does this year. If there's some promise shown that they can maybe get some players for the future in that are on the way. But yeah, point of the matter is you just can't have what transpired at the end of last year. If that carries over into this year, end of the day, you're playing in the ultra competitive SEC, and you gotta show some promise there. So I don't know what happens with his future, but I think he does understand this is a pretty important year for him.
Yeah, and if you don't see at least steps forward or things that you can hold on for the future, we might be having a coaching search in a couple of months. That's the reality, especially in the SEC right now, where you have the reigning national champions in Texas, LSU, all of these teams who know how to win and know how to make deep runs. And, we've seen nobody at home wants to have another year kind of like they did last year, where it's like, oh, man, this could be it, and then they crash and burn. They need to see some progress, momentum. Last question I have, and then we'll let you go. What are your expectations for this season?
Yeah, I think my expectation is I'm already expecting a team that really likes each other and likes to play together. I think the chemistry is going to be good, end of the day, because they all really and genuinely like each other, and it seems like the locker room's great. I don't know win-loss expectations. I don't expect them to be very high up in the SEC. I just don't. If you look at the roster and compare it to some other teams in the league, it's hard to see them being super competitive in the SEC. They could be that team, though, that we're sleeping on because we just don't know what they have. I think that's the biggest thing. There's so many pieces on this team that we just really don't know what they can do. The exhibition game was big in my eyes, just kind of getting a feel for maybe some of their strengths. I'm concerned with their rebounding. That's always kind of been a concern with their teams, but I think it could be really, really prevalent this year. They only won the rebounding battle against a D2 team by 5. Gave up, I think, 13 offensive rebounds, somewhere around there. So that's tough. But I think my expectation is just for them to have a team that likes to play together and that they play hard. And I don't know what the win-losses will look like. But I will say, Mike Neighbors is a guy that I think I speak for most people. I think a lot of people root for him. He's an Arkansas guy who grew up here. He loves the program, loves the university, loves the state. He wants to be here till he retires. He's said that many times. Like, this was his destination job, and I think that's really important. And I think it's one of those things that I think a lot of people are pulling from this year to defy some of those low expectations.
Absolutely. Only time will tell what those are. I think you make a really good point. If they can show progress and show that they can move forward, Mike Neighbors will be able to stick around for a long time. And look, like you said, he wants to retire here. He's an Arkansas guy. We talk about it all the time in all of our recruiting stuff. You want to keep your in-state talent in-state. And I think he's one of those guys that you would love to keep him in-state because he understands what this basketball program means and what basketball itself means in the state of Arkansas. Yeah. Ethan, thank you so much for coming on. That's going to do it for our first block here at PTN Extra. Coming up after the break, we're talking football with Mike Irwin. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back into PTN Extra. We couldn't go this whole week and not talk about football. Last week, obviously tough for Arkansas, falling 34-10 to LSU. Now you got to flush it really quickly, but there's kind of a caveat to flushing it, right? You go on the road to Starkville. The cowbells will be really loud, I would assume. I won't be there. Our Jacob Morris, Courtney Mims, and Alyssa Orange will be. But you play a Mississippi State team that's 1-6, 0-4 so far in SEC play. What are your initial thoughts on this matchup?
It's just a very, very difficult game to try to wrap anything around if you're going to analyze it. Because on the surface, I mean, they're terrible. The big thing you got to look at.
Tell us how you really feel, Mike.
Well, their defense is awful. They're dead last.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Arkansas ought to score points on these guys. But here's the thing you can't figure out. It's Michael Van Buren taking over from I don't know. Maybe 3 games ago. Did he play in the Florida game? I can't remember, but it seems right in there is where the injury occurred. But if you look at his numbers compared to, other, Blake Shapen was the starter. Okay, he's completed 68% of his passes, Van Buren 53%. I mean, Van Buren has 6 touchdown passes playing in 5 games. Shapen had 8. Playing in 4 games. So you'd look at that and go, well, what's the big deal? The big deal is what's happened to me the last 2 weeks, because 3 weeks ago they got clobbered by Florida. But 3 weeks ago, Texas, closer than probably people thought, 35-13. That got my attention a little bit, but now the last 2 weeks, 10-point loss to Georgia, 10-point loss to A&M. And people are saying that Van Buren is starting to develop because he's a true freshman quarterback and he's getting his legs now. And so they could be catching him right at the wrong time. I think that's what you worry about. And if you do look at his numbers in the last 2 games, he's thrown 6 touchdown passes, 3 in each game. He is inefficient, 22 for 41 in the A&M game, 20 out of 37 against Georgia. So he doesn't complete a lot of his passes. But 306 yards against Georgia, 242 against A&M. Those are big passing numbers. And again, the 3 touchdowns and the 3 touchdowns, I keep hearing that he's a threat running the ball. The numbers don't show that. It just shows that he's making plays the last 2 weeks with his arm. And then you got to ask yourself about Arkansas. Defensively, they should be able to deal with him. But will they? What kind of pressure are they going to put on him? He's getting sacked a lot, so are they going to sack him? Or are they going to go in there and play like they did last week?
Yeah, and to your point there about sacking him, Mississippi State is 14th right now in the SEC when it comes to sacks. They're giving up 3.14 roughly per game. So I think it's a big week for that front 7 of Arkansas to make a game-changing play. We saw last week against LSU. And again, not to knock anything off that LSU offensive line, one of the best, probably the best in the SEC that at least we've seen so far, but they couldn't get anything going. Landon Jackson was always, it felt like, a tenth of a second away from making that game-breaking play, and Garrett Nussmeier, again, dink and dunk. We saw that all week, but it was successful against this defense because they were so concerned of giving up those big plays that they just let LSU walk down the field, take 8 to 10 minutes of possession every time. So this is an Mississippi State team that, to your point, Mike, defense is awful, right? There's no sugarcoating it. Rushing defense, 16th in the league. Scoring defense, 16th in the league. Total defense, 16th in the league. They're giving up 449.7 yards per game. That is A lot.
And
Let's
Arkansas
put it
is
that way.
averaging a little more than that per game.
Right, so it has all of the makings, right, for this to be a big week for Arkansas, for the Hogs to get back on track. But then I was doing some research and looking at the last two games that you mentioned, the A&M game and the other game that Mississippi State played, Georgia. Thank you. These were games that were tight in the first half. This is a team that's going to hang around in the first half, but all these teams, Georgia, Mississippi State, or Georgia, excuse me, A&M, Texas, they pulled away a little bit in the third quarter and wore them down, like you just said. And then, Mississippi State had some garbage time points, so I think some of these losses are definitely closer than they really appear to be. But again, you look at a 10-point loss and go, yeah, maybe not. I don't really know what to make of this.
Yeah, you just worry that he has some kind of career game, and his career is short, but that he does something against Arkansas that he hasn't done in these other games. Maybe throws for 400 yards, 6 touchdowns in a game, something like that. I think if Arkansas plays, I do think people are overreacting to what happened against LSU. We talked about this LSU game last week, and you talked about the mistakes that LSU had made. And I pointed out to you that, yeah, but if you watch the last quarter and a half of the Ole Miss game, they stopped making mistakes. They came from behind. They were a different team, and that's how they won the game. Well, what happened was they played a whole game like that against Arkansas. So what do we conclude? We conclude when LSU doesn't make a lot of mistakes, when their quarterback doesn't get sacked, when he doesn't throw interceptions, they're as good as anybody in the SEC, maybe right up there among the best in college football. So they played a team that was hot and played well. That doesn't mean Arkansas stinks.
Right.
But you have to look at the fact that this is the first time all year that they didn't have a chance in the fourth quarter. That game was over. And we saw them let go when Talon Green got that pass batted down, then it turned into an interception and then led to a touchdown. And so they went from being, and then they went for 2 and made it. So they went from being down 6 to down 14. They stopped playing on both sides of the ball. We've had these fans say all year long, it's just last year's team. And I've railed about that because this is not last year's team. That's the only time they've looked like last year's team because last year's team quit late a lot. So that's something to keep an eye on.
And it felt in that second half, I love that point that you just made, because it felt like Auburn last year or Missouri last year where this team is down. Quite honestly, they shouldn't have been down, right? Let's call it as it is. They were down by, 6 at halftime, and you're thinking, this is still a game. They're still in this.
Exactly.
And then they get the ball back. The defense does what they need to do, only limiting. Remember, we talk about bend, don't break for this Arkansas defense, especially against that. But then Talon goes and makes that pass. Then you set up on 1st and goal within the 5-yard line, right? And you're just like, if you're thinking for an extra second, if you're Talon Green, throw the ball at the feet. Get another play. You've got this free rusher and a linebacker. You really think you're going to out-throw him and lob it? Yeah. Either that's going to be an interception like we saw, and it was a game-changing play, and Arkansas lost any momentum they had after that. Or, worst-case scenario, it's a 5-yard loss. You're now 2nd and 15 at the 3-yard line, but you still have the ball and you still have a chance. This week, I think, if you're Arkansas, you have to establish the run game. It's something that they absolutely didn't do a good enough job of last week, I should say, 38 yards, and that's the key.
And yet, this is a game in which you may be without your leading rusher. You don't know. I mean, Sam Pittman said on Monday he was very questionable or very doubtful or whatever the word was. There hasn't been an update as of when we tape this podcast. I mean, it comes later on this evening, so maybe there'll be some additional word. I will say that Addison Nichols, in his interview, and I guess they talked yesterday, Tuesday.
Yep, last night.
Okay. He did sort of mention Jackson as if he might play. So I'm thinking all year long he's looked like he was hurt, and then he's back in the game. But I also saw on Twitter yesterday, I think it was, where he had that crying emoji as if, I'm not playing. I read into that, maybe not at all any of the rest of the year. Is there some terrible injury we don't know about? So we'll wait and see on that. But now you got to ask yourself, okay, is Braylon Russell the guy? Because that's what Pittman said. This is his big chance. I don't know. The offensive line is going to have to do a good job blocking. It would be better if they got Jaquindon Jackson back. But I see this as a game, once again, considering how bad these guys are on defense, I see this as a game where Talon Green has got to do what he did for most of that game against LSU, which he stood in the pocket, he moved up in the pocket under pressure. He found a lot of receivers they moved the ball down the field. It was other people making mistakes. R-Dub fumbling on their own 36 when they had made a first down. So I think Arkansas should be able to outscore these guys. It shouldn't, and even passing the ball, even if they don't have a lot of rushing yards. But you never know for sure until they play the game.
Absolutely, and you've seen Andrew Armstrong week in and week out continue to step up and be that kind of safety blanket for Talon, be able to make plays. Is there another player you want to see do that this weekend? Who has to be that person? Is it Tesla, Satenia, or Broden?
It should be all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to mention this because
Yeah.
they were all asked about the Mississippi State game last year.
Mm-hmm.
This is a game that Arkansas should have won.
Yeah.
Because Mississippi State was struggling. Arkansas had just beaten Florida. They had all this momentum. Now you get to come back home, and they should have won that game. They lost it. It was a fairly close game, but it was a game in which, honestly, that was a game in which I felt like maybe there were some people out there quitting, just stopping playing. I think they had a chance to score. They intercepted a pass right off the bat. We're down there in the red zone, and then they didn't score. And it looked like K.J. Jefferson kind of just threw in the towel at that point. He had a horrible game.
Yeah.
So the players were asked, is there some revenge because of that? Are you mad at these guys and you want to get back at them for last year? And Andrew Armstrong said, I don't remember that game. That's the right response.
Right.
Because I don't think you need to talk about revenge coming into this game. You need to be talking about just trying to win it.
Yeah, and last year, if you don't remember the game, I'll catch you up really quickly. It was a 7-3 loss for Arkansas in a game that it was an 11 o'clock kickoff. I remember sitting and filming that whole game being like, man, this is almost as bad as it gets. I've seen a lot of bad football growing up from
terrible.
New Jersey and going to Indiana the last 4 years, even though we're 7-0 right now, go Hoosiers. But that was maybe the worst football game I've ever watched, and that's being as nice as it is.
K.J. Jefferson looked like he was somewhere else.
Yeah.
I think they'd have been better off if they'd have benched him.
Maybe his head was already in Orlando sitting at a beach down in
Could have
Florida.
been.
So could be. Let's wrap this up, Mike. If Arkansas wants to win this game this weekend, blank has to happen.
I think Talon Green has to have a good game. Yes, I'd like to see him rush the ball well. I'd like to see Braylon Russell, if he's the guy, gets most of the carries. You'd like to see the offensive line block for him. They should be able to do it. Again, look at how bad their defense is. I expect those guys to score some points in this game because they've got a quarterback that's getting more and more confident every week. So it may be you just got to outscore them. That's what's happened the last, really, ever since he came in. That's what's been going on. And this is a very strange team. They started off with a 56-7 win. Arizona State, not too bad, 23-30. And then how did Toledo beat them 41-17? You know, in Florida, we now know Florida's a lot better than people thought, 45-28. But they're just unpredictable.
Yeah. And who knows what team's going to show up really for both sides, what Mississippi State team is going to show up and what Arkansas team is going to show up. And really, really quickly before we go, big exhibition basketball game this Friday night, Arkansas and Kansas, #1 ranked Jayhawks coming in. What do you think about that really quickly?
I think fans are going to be disappointed because I think they're going to get beat because they don't. I think they probably would have lost anyway. The fans have to understand this. This is a bunch of guys that have not played together. And so they've got, yes, they've been practicing. It's not the same thing. And they've got 3 of their better experienced transfers that probably aren't going to play. So that's going to make this a younger team, and it's going to make it a team that, again, these guys are, for the first time, they're going to be playing against an opponent. If it were just an ordinary opponent, okay, maybe. But Kansas, I don't think you're going to see what you saw last year when Arkansas knocked off the #1 team in the country in an exhibition game. Everybody went bonkers, and then what happened in the season? The season went bonkers.
Right.
So don't go in there, just go in there expecting to have fun. Enjoy these new guys, get to know them, see how they perform, and then we'll see once the season starts.
Absolutely. Got to imagine, too, the ovation for Coach Cal when he takes the floor will be next level. Will it be packed out? Will it be sold out 20,000? I think it'll be pretty close. But that is going to do it for this week's PTN Extra. From Mike Irwin, I'm Evan Kamiko saying so long, and we'll see you right back here next Wednesday on another PTN Extra.